Welcome to another episode of Bleav in the Broncos on the Bleav Network, sponsored by Bet Online. We are joined, of course, with Super Bowl 50 champion, former Denver Bronco, Chris Harris Jr. Chris, it's good to see you. How's it going?
It's going good, man. We got a lot of good news. A couple guys made some headlines, so it's gonna be a fun day.
Yeah, well, OTAs have wrapped up in Broncos country. We are headed towards mandatory minicamp coming up in the next couple of weeks and training camp. This is the best time of year, Chris, because we're finally going to get to see really what the Denver Broncos team is going to look like this season. This is going to be the first episode of our Denver Broncos roster breakdown, and we will be talking about the cornerback room today. Chris, the position that is, of course, your specialty and the position that you played when you won the Super Bowl with the Denver Broncos. Very excited to talk about this group. Lots of big questions surrounding this group, especially the question of who's going to be starting outside across from Pat Surtain II. That is obviously the biggest question going into the season for this group. But Chris, we've got a lot to cover. Before we get into that, we've got a message from our sponsors. BetOnline is your number one source for the NBA Finals and Stanley Cup Finals this season. Every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. When the game's over, head on over to our online casino and get in on a game of blackjack or poker, or unwind with one of our over 150 slot games. Head to the website today to get in on the action. Use promo code BLEAV, that's BLEAV, for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. Bet online. The game starts here. And Chris, where we're going to start is with just a couple of little news nuggets. Chris, the news about Courtland Sutton this offseason, wanting a new contract, wanting that $2 to $3 million raise. We talked about that on one of our last episodes. He went on DNVR yesterday, and he said that he will be at mandatory minicamp despite what's going on with the contract issue. He said he's talked to Bo Nix. He said he's been in touch since the draft. He's just been down in Florida training. Are you excited about Courtland Sutton coming to camp?
Yeah.
Do you think that this means positive things for his outlook on the season? And do you think that Courtland Sutton is going to be a Denver Bronco by week 1?
Yeah.
Or do you think he's going to be on a different team?
I think he'd be on the Broncos, just because they have him at such a great price. It's a great deal for the Broncos, right? When we're looking at all the receivers around the league, seeing the price tag go up, and you have Courtland on a great deal. So, he wants to get a little added redeal, a redo on his deal, especially this year. Added a little couple more money. They knowing the Broncos in their history, they'll probably give them incentive deals, give them a couple more incentives to try to go reach, and almost probably give them some impossible incentives. Like 1,500 yards. You know what I mean? Something crazy.
Yeah.
But they'll figure out a way to try to add that in there
catches.
for him. Yeah, you know what I mean. Some very hard for him to go get. And but I'm excited to see Courtland back. He's like I said, Courtland's been a model player, for the organization, especially the way he works. I mean, he came in with a very high work ethic, right? You never had to tell that kid, "Hey, you need to go harder." He was always going hard. So I think he's a perfect Bronco, right? When we talk about a guy to build upon, and be a leader in that room. So I think they know they need him. And of course, he's a freak specimen. Like, when you see Courtland Sutton, when you walk out there, you're like, hey, this guy, you got to be ready because he's a big guy, So you got to have somebody that can strike some fear on the other team, and he can do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think if they do put an incentive in there that he's going to need 100 catches, we might see him just turn it into Michael Thomas, and we might have the reincarnation of Drew Brees and Michael Thomas in Bo Nix and Courtland Sutton. I totally agree, Chris. I think that he is the consummate professional when it comes to like the type of player that the Denver Broncos need. And when Sean Payton took over, it was all about changing the culture over from the team that was post the Super Bowl 50, and just kind of the lost translation of those teams in those years and the ownership group change and all that. So it's a new era of Broncos football, but Courtland's still one of those guys who has such a positive attitude. He's a very hard worker, like you said. I mean, he was a young guy coming into the league telling the vets how to work and how to practice. Like that's the type of leadership that you want, especially from a young guy and a young wide receiver. So very excited to see Courtland back. Can't wait for mini camp. Can't wait for training camp. And can't wait to see his relationship with quarterback Bo Nix and Sean Payton this season. The other little nugget of Broncos news, Chris, is an interesting one. Randy Gregory, the former Denver Bronco, who was signed a couple of years ago and then subsequently traded to the San Francisco 49ers last season, he is suing the Denver Broncos because of fines that he received while he was using THC for medicinal purposes to treat anxiety and PTSD, per Broncos Avenue and Justin Wingirter. Chris, this is an interesting one because while weed has been relaxed among the government and even in the NFL in some cases, there's still rules and there's still guidelines that you have to abide by, even when you're injured. What do you think about this whole situation and Randy Gregory suing the team because he used THC to treat his conditions?
Knowing probably Randy Gregory's history, he's probably like a lifer in the program, or like the NFL substance abuse programs and things like that. So him going this was the Colorado. He's using the Colorado Act, right? Which I guess he's trying to go use the Colorado laws against the NFL laws, because it's not the Broncos.
Yeah.
It's not the Broncos. Like,
that's the NFL rules.
It's the NFL rule. It's not their rule. You know what I mean? The Broncos, not every organization doesn't have, you play for Denver, you got this whole separate rules for substance abuse than the Cardinals. It doesn't work like that, right? So it looks like this guy is looking for a loophole, to be able to get out of paying to get his money back, pretty much. Get his $500,000 back, which is tons of money, bro. You're losing for medicinal purposes. It's not that important, damn it. $500,000. But that's what I'm seeing. This guy's trying to use a loophole through the Colorado Act and suing the NFL. Okay, you're suing guys that billions. Everybody has a couple billion. So you're not beating the NFL.
In the jar.
Yeah, you're not beating the NFL in any case, or winning or suing them. That's not happening, right? So I don't think anybody's won a case versus the NFL, and then like some guys like major injuries or probably having to do with some brain injury, things like that. But you don't really win too many cases versus the NFL. Yeah, kind of like the FBI, bro. Like they got a high percentage.
You're not beating them. Yeah, man. This is an interesting case, and like again, I completely understand where somebody would want to use marijuana to treat anxiety and PTSD. It definitely does a lot of great things. But man, when you're in the NFL and you're playing under these guidelines, you still have to follow these guidelines, man. Like it's the same with anything. Like we know that there's gonna be people who do it, but it's you get drug tested, you get your drug test done, you come back clean, and that's it. But just follow the guidelines, and it maybe that was the reason why we saw that quick switch from he's signing with the Dallas Cowboys to now he's a Denver Bronco. Who knows? But it's definitely something we're gonna keep.
He probably thought he had a loophole with the Colorado Act. Whatever.
Hey, listen.
This planned out.
If that was the thought process, good for him. He got a lot of money from the Denver Broncos, and
it's true.
It was it didn't pan out very well. So we'll keep our eyes on that for sure. But Chris, the big part of this episode is the Denver Broncos cornerback room. this is a group, Chris, that has overgone a big transformation even since you left. It's been a lot of different faces, a lot of different names, and they finally do have like that cornerstone piece in Pat Surtain. But this is still a group that has a ton of questions coming into this season. They did sign Levi Wallace just around the draft. That's a veteran guy that's coming in who's got a lot of playing experience, but still so many questions. Is Damari Mathis going to bounce back? Is Riley Moss even ready to play in the NFL? Is there another guy on this roster that's going to be able to make an impact? So we're going to break down the starters. We're going to break down the new additions. We're going to break down what this rotation could look like. And Chris is going to give some great insight into Vance Joseph's defense and how these cornerbacks maybe can maximize their season under Vance. So, Chris, let's take a look at the existing returning players for the Denver Broncos in the cornerback room. We have, of course, cornerback 1, Pat Surtain. The second, he returns for yet another season. A lot of trade talk this offseason. That's all nonsense. Mm-hmm. Honestly, Pat Surtain the second is not going anywhere. This is a guy that many players across the league consider to be the best cornerback in the league. Chris, Pat Surtain, blue chip corner. Is he cornerback 1 in this league?
Oh yeah, I mean it's definitely up there with him, Sauce Gardner. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't like Sauce because he doesn't have the high number of picks, but I mean the guy just doesn't give up a lot, right? He doesn't give up a lot at all. When I'm talking about big plays, he doesn't miss a lot of tackles, and he doesn't give up a lot of touchdowns. So that'll help build your resume, right? So he's definitely up there. Especially in the AFC West, I think he's probably him, and I love the Chiefs corner, right? But they're different type of corners,
Yeah.
But I think Surtain is definitely the number 1 corner over here on this side in the AFC West, and especially on our team. So he's gonna have to face a lot of the top receivers because we have such a young secondary, all around. Mm-hmm. Right, so he has to take on a lot of the responsibility this year. Justin Simmons not there no more. No more Kareem Jackson. No more having the veteran safeties. Now you have to take this on. Just take this secondary on by yourself or as the leader, right? Mm-hmm. So it's gonna be an interesting year for him because it's kind of him taking that next step, and so it's gonna be interesting to see how he takes hold of that.
Yeah, me personally, I'm very excited that Pat is a Bronco this season. I was getting a little worried closer to the draft that he was going to be part of some trade package, trying to move up for a quarterback. Very glad that they didn't. Sean Payton said that this was a guy that he scouted when he was in New Orleans that he would have loved to have. So it's good to have Pat. It's good to have like a bona fide number 1 corner, but man, outside of that, it does not look great. The remaining returning players, second-year player Riley Moss out of Iowa, spent a lot of time injured last year with a core injury and just kind of getting acclimated to the NFL game. Hopefully, we'll see a little bit more of him. We'll talk about that more in a minute. Tremont Smith, great special teamer. Was amazing on special teams last year. Good blocker on special teams. He's a great boundary guy when we're talking about guarding gunners on punt. I mean, the multiple times last season he was jamming dudes into the sideline and then getting downfield and making big blocks for Marvin Mims on the punt game. Damari Mathis comes back for another season. This is going to be an interesting guy for us to talk about because he still has some room for growth, and there's still something there. Like I feel like we've seen enough flashes that we know that there is something there. And then of course Art Green and Reese Taylor, both guys that were practice squad, not big contributors, but they do return to the Broncos this season to fight for a roster spot, which is so weird to say when there are so many questions surrounding this group fighting for a roster spot. What does that mean? If there's questions, shouldn't that be, it's just open and fair game? Well, not really, because there's guys with playing experience. So, Chris, let's start with Damari Mathis, because this was a guy who showed flashes his rookie season. He did have a ton of penalties as a rookie, but that's to be expected. You're a rookie, who's being thrust into big time snaps. But Damari Mathis last season, a lot of high hopes for him going into this second season for him, and just could not put it together. Do you think that there is any hope for Damari Mathis to maybe just get into a place where he can be a solid rotational boundary or field corner opposite of Pat Surtain?
Oh man, the thing about Damari is that it's just confidence with him, right? Once you play as bad as he did in the beginning, it's hard to get out of that hole, right? And he just could not get out of it. But he has all the tools, all the talent to be able to be the number 2 corner, right? What comes with that is it comes with a lot more pressure, a lot more, targets, right? Because you're playing opposite of guy Pat Surtain, and what are they going to do? They're going to throw away from him, right? So you gotta be ready to stand up as the number 2, and you got to let them know who you are, right? You got to let, like, I had to do the same thing when I first got in the league, playing opposite of Champ. Right, I had to let them know, like, hey, you're not gonna pick on me. You're gonna have to go somewhere else. Right, and let them know early. So that's what you got to do as a young corner, especially started opposite the number 1 guy like Pat, and it's gonna be great competition. I think out of hopefully they have Levi Wallace in the mix because he's a big corner. Mathis and Moss, I can see those 3 probably really mixing it in for that number 2 spot on the outside. I like Smith. I think he's feisty, but he's a veteran guy. He's always kind of had that special teams role, in the league. And once you get that role, it's like you got to play amazing to get out of that role, right? So I can see that not happening, but it's going to be interesting competition.
Yeah, I mean, Damari Mathis in his first season, like we said, there were flashes. He was targeted 72 times as a rookie, gave up 51 catches, a 96.7 NFL passer rating, when thrown to, 6 penalties, 6 pass breakups, though. So we knew that he had something there, but man, last season, 40 targets, 29 catches allowed, 385 yards. He allowed 455 yards in his rookie season. And that was like almost 800 snaps. And in half the snaps, he gave up 385 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 pass breakup, and a 135.9 passer rating with 4 penalties. That has to be, to me, that has to just be that mental breakdown. Like you said, the confidence level. You play so well as a rookie, you show these little flashes, and you try to build on it, and then it just falls apart in your lap, and then you get benched. And that's such a hard thing to have to deal with, especially as a young player in this league and being across from someone like Pat. Riley Moss, Chris, we touched on Riley Moss a little bit, but Riley Moss is going to be interesting because this dude is a freak athlete. He is like, his measurables when he was coming out for the draft, absolutely insane. But the core injury that he suffered in the offseason last year, that kind of bled into training camp, made him miss some time, made him miss some preseason games. And then he missed a good chunk of the season, didn't really play. And Vance doesn't really play rookies anyways, but there's a lot of hype for him going into this season. I think there's a lot of people looking for him to kind of take that into stride into this season, and it's like, show us what you can do. What do you think the ceiling for Riley Moss is this year? What do you think the expectation should be for Riley Moss going into what really should be like his first true season as an NFL corner. What do you think that looks like for a guy like Riley Moss?
Well, the Broncos, they came out and said that they want him to be the starter, pretty much. Like they expected him to be a starter. They said he has starter talent. And that came from the GM, I Bleav, right?
Yeah.
So when we look at a guy that they drafted high, right? You always
traded up for.
Yeah, you expect him to play. And last year, we got him playing his little spurts and little special teams. It was almost like they kind of like we're going to hide you and develop you even more.
Yeah.
And then try to put you out there. So I think now they're kind of, let's see if he can win the spot, and see if he can take on that number 2 corner, which, when you get drafted that high, that's what they expect from you. And we don't really know his ceiling yet because, we haven't got to see him play fully. Usually it's you don't want to test the ceiling in a practice, right? Because I've seen guys come out and practice amazing, and then we get to the game, they just like, where are you at, right? So it's a totally different world when you're under the lights and everybody and millions of people are watching you, and you got to be like, hey, I got to lock into my fundamentals. I got Odell Beckham across me. I got to have great feet work on the line, right? Yeah. Everybody's watching. So it's a different level. And so we got to get him out there. He has to get some experience. We got to get some game tape on this guy, right? The Broncos, we can't hide them too long, right? We need them now because, you see the depth chart that we have and the guys that we have on there, right? There's nobody spectacular at a number 2. Right. At the number 2 spot. So we expect this guy to be able to rise up and start. He should be the starter.
Yeah. Played 25 total snaps last year on defense. Didn't get game action, Chris, until week 11 against Minnesota. And 21 of those snaps were in coverage. He graded out pretty well on PFF, had a 65.0 coverage grade. Again, he only got targeted one time, but played all over the place. And this is a guy as well, Chris, to keep an eye on because Vance Joseph loves to blitz cornerbacks. That more than anybody. He loves to send those corners. He loves to send as many people as possible. And Riley's athleticism and his explosiveness could make him one of those guys who's just a valuable blitzer from the slot. You can line him up in different alignments, but do want to see him outside. He only got, he didn't have any snaps last season that were like true outside. He had 3 snaps at cornerback. So, I think I'm just excited to see how they use him in training camp. Do they use him outside? Do they use him all over the place? Do they use him as a blitzer? What is his role going to be? I think that's the biggest question for him going into this season. So, Chris, the new additions, the new guys to this cornerback room. 5th round pick this season out of Missouri, Chris Abrams-Drain. We talked about Levi Wallace a little bit. This is a guy who's had experience playing in Buffalo. He had experience playing in Pittsburgh. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of role and attitude he brings to the team as the veteran of the group. And then Quentin Newsome and Tanner McAllister. Newsome was the undrafted free agent out of Nebraska. And then Tanner McAllister was a futures contract. He played at Oklahoma State. And not a lot of NFL experience there. So, Chris, let's
forgot one, man. I think we forgot one. We forgot J-Mac.
Oh, that's right. We did forget J-Mac. He's supposed to be at the bottom here of this picture. No, Jaquan McMillan, the slot corner. Let's talk about Jaquan McMillan because that's a huge piece. That's a big piece.
I was like, we can't miss him, man. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, Jaquan is playing that nickel slot corner role, the role that you made so famous, really across the NFL, not just for the Broncos, but across the NFL. What did you see from J-Mac last year that made you really excited for his growth and progression into year 2 in this defense?
Man, he was just a playmaker last year, being able to get the ball back for the Broncos. Forced fumbles, interceptions. Great blitzer, great tackler in space, very physical. Now it's I see him struggle a little bit when they started to put him in motion, started to put him in stacks and bunches, things like that. But that's kind of the learning curve as a young nickel. You have to learn and improve on. And I think he'll be better with that this year. Taking more command of the secondary because you have to make a lot of calls in that middle. I'm interested to see, are they going to pin him at just a nickel? Is he just a nickel? Because what I did was I started outside and I moved inside. So that's what a lot of people forget is that I just didn't play inside during base. I was outside. So can he do base outside and move inside, kind of like how I did, or is he just a straight nickel guy? So I think that's a question for him that he's going to have to answer for himself. And but he definitely is probably one of the top guys in the nickel coming back, returning. In this league, he's second best in our division, right? Because he's had the number 1 guy of the All Pro. So, we can definitely see. I want to see if he's going to be able to take that next leap. Is he just a nickel corner, or can he play both?
Or is he a corner? I mean, he played 17 snaps aligned outside, 605 snaps in the slot, 41 snaps in the box. I think he's probably trending more towards just being that true slot guy. And like we said, with Vance being one of those DCs who just loves to send guys from the slot, McMillan is so good at that. He really showed last year that he understands how to blitz. And I feel like a lot of very casual NFL fans don't understand that, like, even as a blitzer, you still have gap integrity. You still have to execute your role and your job because there's spacing involved and certain, there might be twists and stunts that you have to work around. Like, you still have a responsibility. It's not just, all right, go, free run in there. Don't care about anybody else. Like, if you blitz the wrong gap, you give up gap integrity, it's a bad time. So Jaquan showed that he definitely understands that role. And I think it kind of suits him. He is built for being a guy who's 5'9". Like, Chris, honestly, like, you and him are very built players. So it's gonna be interesting to see how he can just stack last season onto this season, because he did give up a 109.4 passer rating, but man,
what was his passer rating?
109.4 is what he gave up last year.
That's not very. That's not.
No,
that's not very good at all. Yeah,
he was targeted 67 times, gave up 41 catches, and he was responsible for 8 touchdowns allowed. So
he gave up 8 touchdowns last year.
That's what PFF has it as. Some of those touchdowns might not have been him, but
I'll give him 4 or 5, not 8.
Yeah, still needs to improve quite a bit in some areas, but last year's defense was just so messy. Like, I think we can just put an asterisk on Jaquan's stats from last year because there was a lot of confusion going on. They were still running a lot of Fangio stuff. Didn't really get into the Vance stuff until later in the year when they went on that 5-game streak. And that's kind of when we saw that play pick up anyways. So, I think 4 is probably the right number there.
8 touchdowns? I can't remember 8 touchdowns, Pat, but
I know that's what I'm saying.
Bad, though. If they put 8 on them, that's a lot.
They said he gave up 2 against Vegas, 1 against New England, 1 against Detroit, which I remember the Detroit one. That was on him.
I remember the Vegas. The Vegas.
1 against Houston, and then
remember the Houston one?
week 7 against Green Bay, week 6 against KC, and then week 4 against Chicago. I don't know about those ones. They were still running.
Chicago one, he did give up. So yeah, he might have gave up 8.
He might have.
He might have. Yeah.
He might have. Well, we need to see an improvement, definitely. But he is going to be a big part of this defense this season. I think that his role should get a little more clear and defined, especially with PJ like coming into his own as a safety and Brandon Jones coming in there. I feel like this should be a much better opportunity for him to put in a full season of work. Chris, before we get out of here, last one that I want to touch on. We've talked about Quentin Newsome before in a previous show. Tanner McAllister, I don't really see him making an impact here. But Chris Abrams-Draine, this is going to be one of the players to watch because this guy could be that type of player that you were talking about. Can he play outside? Can he also play inside? I think if any player on this roster in this room right now has that ability, it's Chris Abrams-Draine. This dude played so much bigger than his listed size at Missouri. He was like, he could play the boundary, he could play the field, he could play against big receivers, quick receivers. I mean, he put together a really, really solid body of work last season with the Tigers. What do you think about Chris Abrams-Draine? Do you think that he, despite Vance not playing rookies, do you think that he could see some meaningful snaps this season inside and outside?
He's the wild card to be able to start, I think, because playing in the SEC, playing man, playing in the boundary, playing in the slot, going against the top receivers that you're going to see have 1,000 yards next year, right? And he competed great versus those guys, made plays, right? So I think he definitely has a chip on his shoulder, like, hey, man, I've been playing the SEC. I've been playing these top guys. I was one of the top corners in my conference. Right. I know I can transfer this to the NFL and come in and play early. So his mindset is that, hey, I'm coming to take that starting job opposite Surtain. So he's my wild card. We expect him definitely to play. So hopefully we'll see if they try to hide him, kind of like they did Riley Moss. But I don't think they can. I don't think there's no hiding anybody in this secondary anymore. Because we're going to need all of them to play, right? And we need to see who's going to be the clear-cut guy opposite Pat.
That's facts. All right, Chris. So we've gone over all the guys. We've taken a look at each and every one of them. Last season, the Broncos kept 6 corners. Who are the 6 from these 2 slides? Who are the 6 that you see being on the Denver Broncos next season? Obviously,
man, I like Newsome too, man, just because he's a big side. He's our biggest corner.
Yeah.
I mean, him and Pat probably even, because you got to remember, Pat's a big corner too.
Pat's pretty big, yeah.
Yeah, compared to like NFL prototype, Pat's a big corner.
Yeah.
I would love to see how Newsome is. He'll probably be on the practice squad, right? So my 6 will be Pat, Moss, Jaquan McMillan, Levi Wallace, Mathis, and Chris Abrams-Draine. Mathis could get pushed out, right? Depending on if Newsome comes out there, because he's a big body. If he can come out there and show that he can play in the league and put some good things on film, that might force the Broncos to have to keep this guy, because everybody's looking for 6'2" corners that can play, right? So if he goes out there and puts some solid film out there in the preseason, the Broncos might be forced to keep this guy. So I can see 6. I don't see them keeping 5 this year. I see them keeping around 6 and a practice squad guy for sure.
Yeah. And Tremont Smith, man. Like it's
and hard. Him. That can make 7.
It's going to be hard for, like, if Mathis struggles in camp and Tremont Smith just continues to be this like really good special teamer, and then can contribute a little bit like with the second and third team, man, it's going to be hard for Damari to get over that hump. But he's going to have to show out in camp. Riley Moss is he's going to have to show out in camp as well. I feel like Chris Abrams-Draine is going to earn himself a spot on this roster and probably some meaningful snaps. He just has that mentality to me. But yeah, like you're saying with Newsome, it's so hard to find good, solid, physical corners in this league. And when we're coming back to this, like, okay, now we got to press. Like receivers are starting to get a little bit smaller, a little bit quicker. Hey, now the corners got to get a little bit bigger and a little bit tougher. We saw this kind of shift go on. We're seeing it with offensive, defensive line as well. So it's going to be interesting to take a look at. But follow us throughout minicamp, training camp for these roster breakdowns. We will be watching very closely for this position, Chris. On the next episode, we'll be breaking down the wide receivers. This is going to be an interesting group to talk about. Lots of questions. Who in the world is going to fill out that room? We're going to find out. Make sure that you subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. Make sure that you follow Chris and I on Twitter at Chris Harris Jr., at Patrick Chiotti, and follow at Bleav Network as well. And make sure that you go over and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We greatly appreciate it. This, of course, has been Bleav in the Broncos on the Bleav Network, sponsored by BetOnline. Chris, any last words?
Oh, no, I'm excited, man. I'm ready for the competition. Mandatory mini camp is coming up. And, you know, all the media will be out there 24/7 to be able to watch the practices. So I'm excited to see what we hear.
I'm excited to see Bo Nix in action. Hopefully we get some Chris Harris Jr. no-fly zone at training camp. Hopefully. But
I'll be at a game. I'll be at a game for sure. I'm looking at the Chargers game. We can throw that out there, you know, because the Chargers are mad at me because
they are.
I said Herbert didn't, which I thought was a fair assessment. If you really look at it, we're talking about clutch, right? If he's so clutch, then his clutchness would be higher than, you know, a Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes.
Burrow's been in the Super Bowl, man. I mean, look, Justin's got to get over that little hump. You know, the surrounding talent around him hasn't been great. The defense hasn't been fantastic, but man, he is still like
the receivers have been great. They put the running back. He had Eckler, and then he had 2 Pro Bowl receivers.
Great offense.
Now you don't have those guys. You don't have those guys anymore. You don't have receivers that are Keenan Allen and Mike Williams or Eckler back there. So now it's really on you now. So let's see what happens this year.
Yeah, let's see what Justin can put together. We'll definitely be watching. Maybe we'll get Lorenzo Neal on this show, and we can talk about that. The Chargers, the Bolt Nation was mad at you, Chris, and they were coming after me too. Like, what am I gonna do? It's not. Oh man, Broncos country. We will be with you all throughout training camp. Make sure that you follow this series as we break down every position group for the Broncos. Until next time, Broncos country. We'll see you then.